I came to dance as a kind of personal revelation. I was a rather lost young man. At the age of 21, I was studying agriculture, working on farms in the UK, something that I enjoyed very much. I'd been very interested in the arts when I was at school, but I'd lost my confidence through my education in my abilities. And by chance, I went with some friends to see a film of the Royal Ballet, something with which I had no contact whatsoever and no interest in going, other than though I knew that I didn't want to stay at home on my own. And I saw a film of the Royal Ballet, and 4 days later I had enrolled as a 21-year-old in a local ballet school. And dance had changed my life. When I went into the work that I've done for the last 30 years, working in the community as opposed to just with professionals, it wasn't as many people imagined, because I had some kind of vision of working in the community or helping people in the community or dealing with social issues at all. It was purely by chance. Someone offered me a job. I was living in rural Scotland. I wanted some local work, and someone asked me to take over a workshop or a weekly class for a group of 5 adults who were doing something called creative dance. And my first question is, what on earth is creative dance? As a professional through and through, I had no idea what that was. I was interested in and used to professional structures and professional training. So I took it with no great interest, but just that it was a little job for me to do, slightly reluctantly. But as I began to work, I started to notice extraordinary changes happening in the people around me. There were changes actually not just to them, but to me. I began to feel I was part of a community of people, and that we were undergoing some kind of a transformative experiment together. And it was only as time progressed and I gained experience that I began to see just how powerful the work that I was a part of and the skills that I had been taught, how powerful they were as motivators for change. And I became hooked. It became addictive. On a personal level, the joy of finding yourself involved in individual transformation or community development, the feeding it gave to me, the growth in myself, being part of that process became something that I almost didn't want to live without. I loved the engagement and the real sense of being a part of the community. And so I went from there very quickly into working with really hundreds of people. I was one of the first people in the UK to have a full-time job paid by local government to use my skills and my passion in any way that I felt might benefit the community. And so I was able, at the highest level, in connection with the ministers of education and the social institutions and health and local authority officers at a very high level, to be able to implement a program. And it was very organic and started by me, but it began to be pushed forward by the community themselves. So I was working very soon with people aged from 5 to 80, people with all kinds of abilities and backgrounds. And I also began to discover, as a choreographer, just what dance was as its essence. What happens when you take away the technique that I had learned for many years and discover that everybody has within them this extraordinary range of movement. And it wasn't that I had already a very strong, perhaps social political agenda as a person, but as an artist, I found it incredibly stimulating and exciting to walk into a room with people and know that I had a certain amount of time to develop the highest quality art that I could, using the material in front of me and developing the material. And so I am always saying to other artists, don't be afraid, it's actually very exciting. Because many professional artists are afraid of going into this field. They say, what do I do when I walk in a room with people who have no common language with me? And I say, they have a great common language with you. It's just not their specific tight little language that you have learned as a professional. So it developed me, I think, as a social animal, as a political animal, but it also developed me as an artist. One of the things that I'm asked wherever I work is, what is the difference between our children and the other children you work with? And in Germany, where I work a lot, they say, well, what's the difference between working with children here or working with adults and working with people, say, in Ethiopia or in Peru? And I say, you know, in the end, it's not the difference that's relevant. The difference takes care of itself. What I work with is the communality. And what I discovered is at the end, the issues are all the same. Issues of single parentage, issues of economic marginalization, issues of homelessness, issues of unemployment, issues of perhaps second marriage or step-parents, the kinds of things that we are facing in the UK and in Europe are, I discover, often at the core of the problems that young people are facing in what we call the developing countries. And I have come to realize that what we need to work with is what people have in common. That's what I can take. I can't work if I go in acknowledging difference, because I feel that so often, especially when it comes to things like marginalization or integration, that we are obsessed with this problem of difference. And I keep thinking that perhaps if we could just put that aside for a little and research what it is we have in common, this would inspire us to move forward. And in the end, I have to say, you know, actually the difference isn't really what I'd like to talk about. What I'd like to talk about is the sameness. Because we all feel, we all bleed, we all have joy, we all have sorrow, and they're the same kinds of sorrows. And I can give an example that working during the Balkan conflict with people from different sides, with Muslims, with Catholics, with Serbs and Orthodox, when we actually brought them, a group of mothers from each community, out into France, they started within hours to hug each other and to cry and discover that what mattered was not that one was Catholic and one was Muslim, not that one was Croat and one was Serb, but actually that both of them were bereaved mothers. That what they had in common was the tragedy of the loss of their children, and they healed each other. And that for me was a very big lesson. And secondly, I remember working on the day that Mandela was elected. I had the privilege of being invited for the first time to South Africa on his election day, which is something I'll never forget. And I was asked to work with 300 children from the black, from the Asian, from the white, and what was then called the colored communities, the mixed race communities. And the white parents in particular were really nervous because the white children were taken into the Asian and colored townships to do the project. And the mothers insisted in coming with them because they were so nervous about the situation. And people were saying, do you think it's going to work to mix them for the first time? And I said, just relax, let's do it. And I remember taking the first training session for an hour and a half with kids with different skin colors, totally different experiences and backgrounds, and then saying, let's have half an hour's break. And immediately the teenage girls, whatever color, congregated in the middle of the room, lying down, talking about music and boys and boyfriends and everything else. The boys all went outside and played football together, and the little kids all ran into the showers to run the taps and flood the toilets. And that's what I've said forever. You don't integrate. People will integrate naturally if you provide the safe environment that they can do it. You don't do it. In the same way as you don't empower people, you create a situation where people can empower themselves. Of course, I face always the accusation of cultural imperialism. We hear it constantly. It's a very interesting thing that if I take my passion and my culture into, say, Africa, that everybody says, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, it's cultural imperialism. On the other hand, if Africans, my African colleagues, contemporary artists, come to the United Kingdom, they are criticized for doing contemporary art because everybody says, oh, what we want to see is your traditional art, which is very frustrating for them. So we have actually a double standard. We actually should be able to share what we love and what we have as a passion, not to say it is better, not to supplant what you have, but along with our respect for what you have, say, you know what, this is what I love, this is my passion, this is what I can bring. Is there anything you can use that would be valuable for you in exchange for what I can see that would be valuable for me? And one of the things I noticed working in Ethiopia, that this accusation of cultural imperialism is not coming when people bring what I would call the viruses from the West of consumerism. For instance, there are, throughout Addis Ababa, there are video shops showing violent, pornographic Western films. There are nightclubs run on the Western model and bars. No one complains about this because it is commercial. It makes money, it's financial, it's business. When you try to bring what you feel is of real value from the West, those cultural things that have come out of our traditions, suddenly, because it's not commercial, it's an easy target. What I've said is, when I go into a place like Ethiopia or into South Africa or into Zimbabwe or Senegal or to Peru, where there are strong traditional art forms, I want us to work with both. I won't work with the traditional art form, I'll work with mine. But I always have colleagues, as in Ethiopia, the head of the National Theatre or one of the finest Ethiopian dancers in Addis, who comes and we form a partnership and we work together. And we are putting equal value on both kinds of work, on both cultures. The reason I think it's important is that the young people in a country like Ethiopia, which is what I was talking about today as an example, are in a terrible limbo, have a real problem with identity. On the one hand, they have the tribal pressures and the traditional pressures and the family pressures and the religious pressures of a very strong Orthodox church. And they have their traditions. But they are faced every day with the excitement and what seems to be this promise of prosperity and success and freedom of Western values that are permeating the television. It's everything that they see. And they are naturally drawn away from the restrictions of the tradition and what they falsely see as the freedoms of Western culture. And it creates an enormous dilemma. So what I say is, why don't we help them by trying to bring out the best of both, so that we form a bridge between the two, where they can learn to experience and enjoy the best of what we have to offer, while still not neglecting and valuing what they have, and actually seeing where the two things meet. And one of the things that, of course, again, I've often been criticized for, well, why don't you come in and work with their culture? And I say, well, how arrogant of me. You don't learn a person's culture in 6 months or a year or 3 years. And I know that what I thought I had learned at the end of 1 year had to be completely revised at the end of the second and completely revised at the end of the third. That is not for me to do. I will try to create facilities where they can develop and work in and explore their own cultural forms. But what I want and what I see has happened is that when I've given the structural skills, how to choreograph, how to teach, how to work with material, how to make theater, how to make dance, that what happens is when I begin to withdraw, that several years later on, they are beginning to mix these cultures and produce something unique, which is called Ethiopian contemporary dance. And one of the things that is very exciting, and I am convinced from my work in Senegal and what I've seen, is that the most exciting contemporary dance in the world at the moment is coming out of Africa. There are extraordinary young contemporary artists in Africa who are struggling to break the mold from the West of being exotic, of being traditional, the grass skirt mentality, the bare breast, the drumming mentality. Not that they don't value their own culture, and I'm not saying that is their culture, not that they don't value that, but they say, we are artists. We are part of the modern world too. We are part of the tradition here, but we are part of the family of urban youth living in the world. And it is our right to make the art we wish to make. And I have the same problem with a colleague of mine in the UK who's always complaining, who is a dancer. And she's a black dancer living in England. She's English through and through. And when she's coming out to work in Ethiopia, everybody says, oh, how great, you're just going to love the African dance. And she said, African dance is not my passion. I'm a ballet girl. I love ballet. And that's a right that everybody has to make the choice. We don't influence them. We say, here's this piece of bread and here's that piece of bread. And you can choose either and are capable of working with either. One of the problems that we also have is that language is used to confuse, language is used to manipulate, language is used to control. This also, there is a problem in that a lot of the people I work with are not comfortable with language. They've not necessarily had a literary education that allows them to express themselves. And also through language, very often, they only express themselves by revealing detail, which may be detail that in the end they don't need to reveal. But through the language of the body, they can at least have a holiday, a break from what I call this tyranny of words. And I felt it today in the workshop. I know that people came to me every day, we're talking and say, we want to dance, we want to move. I don't think I can take one more piece of information. I'm just hearing and hearing and hearing and talking, and it's all going in my head and I'm stuck. And it was that wonderful moment when Magbul from Ethiopia, one of our Adugna dancers, suddenly just stood up and said, let's dance, and everybody stood up. And something happened in that room, and I felt everybody communicated with everybody at that moment. We freed everybody for a few moments from the tyranny of words. That's what I mean. One of the problems we face is that very often dance is seen just as a kind of recreational fun activity. Of course it is, and of course it should be. But actually it's highly disciplined, and it's very hard work, and it is much more than fun. It is not just about diversion and fun and escape. It's also about really facing the issues in your life that matter. And one of the things about dance that's very important is that it is holistic. It involves the physical, it is cognitive, it is spiritual in the broadest sense, and perhaps most important, and emotional, and most important, perhaps it's social. And that's why I say, dancing together, we can live together. It's specifically good at dealing with all kinds of personal prejudices. For instance, in dance, we have to negotiate space and time with others in a very sophisticated way. So it requires very highly developed social skills, skills of cooperation, of acknowledgement of the space of others, and the need also at the same time to establish your own space, negotiation, cooperation. We lift each other, we support each other. When we touch each other, when you have lifted and supported and touched, you feel differently about human beings. And I have another saying, which is a little glib in some ways, but I like to use it, which is prejudice is only skin deep. Touch the skin, it's very difficult to feel differently about somebody. You will feel differently about somebody. In dance, we do that. We touch the skin, we touch the soul, we touch the spirit, we touch the person. We are faced with the challenge of finding solutions to artistic problems, or artistic solutions to choreographic problems. We work together to solve something. We can work as an individual, discovering about ourselves. We work with a partner. That requires very sophisticated negotiation. Actually, if we are not very sophisticated in our negotiation, it can be dangerous. You can drop someone, you can crash into someone, you can break a limb, someone else's or your own. So we are negotiating at a very, very fine, very sophisticated level. When it comes to the case of men in dance, and I work with a lot of men, both in prisons and men with perhaps a history of violence or extremely marginalized or perhaps involved in counter or subcultures, drugs or whatever, what I find is that for most men, their only experience of touch is macho. Their experience of touch tends to be in terms of confrontation and violence, and that the opportunities to touch appropriately in terms of real, genuine communication are denied to men. It is not part of their upbringing, certainly in the West. This, for instance, is not true in Ethiopia, but to the same extent. So many of the men I work with have only touched other men in abusive, violent, physical or sexual kind of controlling way. And what you're opening for them is the opportunity to use the body, to bring the body into play in a way that is to do with communication, understanding, care and compassion. What it also does when you dance is you cannot but help to start releasing emotion, getting in touch with the emotional self. And this is something that men find extremely hard. And in dance, you can provide a safe environment. The way I do that is I simply refer to the choreography. You have to lift this man or touch him because it is required as part of the choreography. I don't tackle them head on in terms of the emotion, because that would be too frightening. But I work from the physical outwards. So by simply engaging them, simple exercises of pulling, pushing, trusting, lifting, whatever, they themselves begin to engage emotionally. And what I have heard throughout my 31 years working in the work from men is that this is a revelation. It is something that changed their lives. Dance for men is very important. On the another level to that, part of the work I have done and tried to pioneer, and I think has worked very well, is when I'm working with violent or disturbed young men, I do projects together with vulnerable children. And people are very afraid of this idea, and I say, just trust me, it will work. And when I take a group of men from a prison or a group of men with a violent or disenfranchised background and put them with little children with learning difficulties, disability, or just little children, I have in 24 hours violent men turning into pussycats. Because suddenly they have a role, they have a place, they see themselves as role models, they have something to offer. That's from their side. What they get back is they are working with children who do not see them with the baggage. They don't see criminals, they don't see drug abusers, they see wonderful big boys who are dancing with them. So for the first time, they're in a room with people, little people, who want them and accept them unconditionally. This is life-changing on both sides.